Kevin Smith stared at the overnight cleaning crew through his corner office window, watching a man in his 60s methodically mop the marble floors with an attention to detail that seemed almost reverent. There was something in the janitor's posture, shoulders straight despite the humble work, movements precise and deliberate, that made Kevin pause his late-night spreadsheet review. The man worked alone, having arrived after the others left, and Kevin had noticed him every night for 3 weeks now. What struck him wasn't just the man's thoroughness, but the way he seemed to belong in the corporate halls of Smith Industries, as if he understood something about the building that others missed. Kevin didn't know that by morning, everything he thought he knew about success, dignity, and the people who clean up after ambition would be forever changed. Before we dive in, make sure to hit subscribe and leave a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The elevator hummed its familiar tune as Kevin Smith descended to the 32nd floor at 11:47 p.m., a ritual that had become as routine as his morning coffee. The building was different at this hour, stripped of its daytime urgency. The marble corridors echoed with the kind of silence that made a man hear his own thoughts too clearly. He wasn't supposed to be here this late. Sarah had stopped asking why he stayed past midnight, her questions dissolving into the kind of resigned quiet that settles over marriages like dust on unused furniture. But Smith Industries was bleeding money, and bleeding quietly, the kind of slow hemorrhage that happened when a company grew too fast and forgot to check if its foundation could bear the weight. Kevin pushed through the glass doors of the accounting department, his reflection ghost-like in the darkened windows. He needed the quarterly reports, needed to see the numbers that would determine whether they could make payroll next month or start drafting the kind of letters that turned people's lives inside out. That's when he saw him. The man was maybe 65, maybe older, it was hard to tell. He wore the standard-issue uniform of the cleaning company, navy blue with Professional Building Services, embroidered in white thread that had seen better years. But something about the way he moved through the space made Kevin stop mid-stride. The janitor wasn't rushing, wasn't cutting corners the way most night shift workers did when they thought no one was watching. He mopped each section of floor twice, wringing out the mop with methodical precision. When he reached the area around Kevin's secretary's desk, he carefully lifted each item: the small cactus, the photo of her twin daughters, the ceramic mug with "World's Oakiest Employee" printed in fading letters cleaned beneath them, and placed everything back exactly as it had been. Kevin found himself holding his breath. The man noticed him then, looking up from his work with eyes that were alert, intelligent, unclouded by the kind of defeat Kevin expected to see in someone pushing a mop past midnight. "Evening," the janitor said, his voice carrying the faint trace of an accent Kevin couldn't place. "Hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all." Kevin realized he was staring and tried to recover his composure. "You're new." It wasn't a question, but the man nodded anyway. 3 weeks tomorrow. I'm Walter." He didn't offer a last name, didn't extend his hand for a shake. Just returned to his mopping with the same careful attention, as if their brief exchange had been filed away in whatever mental catalog he kept. Kevin retrieved his files and headed back to the elevator, but something made him pause at the threshold. "Walter?" The man looked up again. "The previous crew. They never cleaned under things, never moved anything." Walter smiled, and it was the kind of smile that suggested he knew things he wasn't telling. Different people have different ideas about what clean means. The elevator doors closed on that cryptic response, but Kevin found himself thinking about it during the ride to his office. Found himself thinking about it as he spread the quarterly reports across his mahogany desk, the numbers blurring together in columns of red ink and dashed hopes. Smith Industries was dying. Not dramatically, not with the spectacular flameout that made headlines and ruined reputations overnight. It was dying the way most mid-sized companies died, slowly, bureaucratically, with meetings about meetings and consultants who charged astronomical fees to tell him what he already knew. His father had built this company with 16-hour days and a philosophy that every employee mattered, every client deserved the best they could give. But his father was gone now. Dead, 3 years from a heart attack that the doctors said was caused by stress, but Kevin knew was caused by watching his life's work slowly transform into something he no longer recognized. Kevin had tried to honor his father's vision, had tried to maintain the culture of excellence and personal attention that made Smith Industries more than just another consulting firm. But excellence was expensive, and personal attention didn't scale, and at some point he'd started making the kind of compromises that seemed small in isolation but accumulated like compound interest. Now they were competing with firms that could underbid them by 30% because they treated their employees like numbers on a spreadsheet and their clients like problems to be solved as quickly and cheaply as possible. The phone rang. Kevin glanced at the caller ID and felt his stomach tighten. Richard. Kevin, thank God you're still awake. We need to talk about the Henderson contract. Richard Stavros had been his father's business partner back when the company was young enough to run on handshake deals and trust. Now he was the kind of partner who called at midnight with the tone of voice that meant someone was about to get fired. What about Henderson? They're pulling out. Said our last deliverable was adequate but uninspired. Their words, not mine. Kevin closed his eyes. The Henderson contract was worth $2 million over 18 months. Without it, they'd have to lay off 12 people by Friday. Did they say why, specifically? Same thing we keep hearing. Our work is solid, professional, all the boxes checked. But it doesn't have the spark anymore. Doesn't have whatever made us special. Kevin wanted to argue, wanted to defend the work they'd been doing, but he'd read the Henderson report. Richard was right. It was competent and forgettable, the kind of analysis that any consulting firm could have produced. There was nothing wrong with it, and nothing remarkable about it either. How bad? Kevin asked, though he already knew. Bad enough that I've been getting calls from headhunters. Our best people are getting poached. The ones who haven't left yet are updating their LinkedIn profiles. After Richard hung up, Kevin sat in the dark of his office, watching the city lights blur together through windows that needed cleaning. 32 floors below, traffic moved in rivers of red and white, people going somewhere with purpose he envied. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Don't forget Emma's recital tomorrow at 7. She's been practicing for weeks. He'd forgotten. Again. Kevin typed back. Wouldn't miss it, and immediately felt the weight of a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. He was still sitting there an hour later when he heard the soft squeak of wheels in the hallway. Through his open door, he could see Walter pushing his cleaning cart past the executive offices, moving with the same unhurried precision Kevin had noticed earlier. Something made him get up and follow. Walter was in the conference room now, the one with the long table where Kevin's father used to hold his famous Monday morning meetings. The old man would sit at the head of that table and somehow make every person in the room feel like their contribution mattered, like they were building something bigger than themselves. Now it was just a room where they conducted layoffs and discussed cost-cutting measures. Walter was cleaning the whiteboard, erasing the remnants of their last strategy session flowcharts and bullet points that added up to a plan for managed decline. But he wasn't just wiping it clean. He was studying what was written there, his brow furrowed in concentration. Complicated stuff, Kevin said from the doorway. Walter didn't startle, just continued his methodical erasing. Most things are, once you really look at them. You understand business strategy? I understand when something's not working. Walter rinsed his cloth in a small bucket, wrung it out carefully. Question is whether you're trying to fix the right problem. Kevin stepped into the room. What do you mean? Walter gestured at the whiteboard, now clean except for one corner where someone had written, "What would Dad do?" in Kevin's handwriting. Walter had left that untouched. You're trying to compete on price, trying to be faster, cheaper, more efficient. Walter's voice was matter-of-fact, no judgment in it. But that's not why people used to choose you. How would you know why people chose us? Walter finished cleaning the table, his movements still precise and unhurried. Same way I know you're not sleeping. Same way I know you care more about this place than most of the people who work here during daylight hours. He paused, meeting Kevin's eyes directly for the first time since they'd started talking. Some things you don't need a resume to recognize. Walter pushed his cart toward the door, then stopped. Your father's picture. The one in your office. He's wearing a Smith Industries polo shirt, but it's not the current logo. Kevin nodded, unsure where this was heading. Old logo was simpler, just the company name, clean font. New one's got all kinds of flourishes, graphics, modern touches. Walter's voice was thoughtful. Bet the old shirts cost less to make too. He was right. The new logo had been part of a rebranding effort 2 years ago, something about modernizing their image and appealing to younger clients. It had cost $40,000 and generated exactly zero new business that Kevin could trace back to the change. Sometimes, Walter said, the problem isn't that you're not good enough. Sometimes the problem is you've forgotten what good enough looks like. After Walter left, Kevin sat alone in the conference room, staring at the whiteboard that somehow looked cleaner than it had in months. The building hummed around him, HVAC systems and security monitors, and the distant sound of Walter's cart moving through corridors that would soon fill with people who depended on him to keep their paychecks coming. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts until he found the number for Jim Patterson, their longest-standing client. A man who'd been working with Smith Industries since Kevin's father was running the company from a strip mall office with 4 employees and a dream. It was almost 2 a.m., but Jim had always been a night owl. Kevin? Jesus, what time is it? Jim, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. A pause. Okay. When did we stop being special? The silence stretched long enough that Kevin wondered if the call had dropped. Then Jim sighed, the sound of a man who'd been waiting for this conversation. You want the truth? I need it. About 2 years ago. Maybe a little more. Your work is still solid, Kevin. Better than solid. But it feels corporate now. Like it's coming from a committee instead of from people who give a damn. Kevin closed his eyes. The Henderson contract. I heard. I'm sorry. Are you going to leave us too? Another pause. I don't know. I want to stay, Kevin. Your father was a good friend, and you're a good man. But my board is asking questions I'm having trouble answering. After the call ended, Kevin walked back to his office and stood at the window, watching Walter's methodical progress through the building below. The man worked like he had all the time in the world, like each task deserved his full attention regardless of who was watching. Kevin thought about his father's Monday morning meetings, thought about the way the old man used to walk through the office, stopping at every desk, asking about projects and families and weekend plans with equal interest. His father had known the names of everyone's children, remembered birthdays, showed up to hospital visits when people got sick. When had Kevin stopped doing that? When had Smith Industries become the kind of place where people updated their LinkedIn profiles in secret and collected paychecks while looking for something better? His computer chimed with an email. The subject line read, "Resignation letter. Effective immediately." It was from Janet Morrison, their lead project manager. The woman who'd trained half their current staff, who'd been with the company for 8 years, who'd never taken a sick day, and always volunteered for the difficult clients. Dear Kevin, please accept this as my formal resignation from Smith Industries. My last day will be Friday, July 28th. This was not an easy decision. I have tremendous respect for you and for what your father built here. However, I've accepted a position that better aligns with my professional goals and values. I wish you and the team all the best. Sincerely, Janet. Kevin read the email 3 times, each pass making his chest tighter. Professional goals and values. That was corporate speak for, I can't stand working here anymore. He picked up his phone to call Janet, then put it down. What would he say? That he was sorry she felt that way? That he'd try harder to make things better? He'd been saying those things for months now, and here was the result. A soft knock on his door frame made him look up. Walter stood there with his cleaning cart, but he wasn't moving to enter the office. Didn't mean to interrupt, Walter said. Just wanted to let you know I'll be cleaning the executive floor last tonight, if you're planning to stay much longer. Kevin gestured him in. Come on in. I could use the company. Walter entered but didn't immediately start cleaning. Instead, he looked around the office with the same careful attention Kevin had noticed downstairs. Your father? Walter asked, nodding toward the framed photo on Kevin's desk. Yeah, David Smith. He started this company 32 years ago. Walter approached the desk and studied the photo Kevin's father standing in front of their first office building, arm around a woman Kevin didn't recognize. Both of them were smiling with the kind of unguarded joy that seemed impossible in the corporate world Kevin inhabited now. He looks happy, Walter observed. He was. Even when things were tough, even when we were competing for contracts against firms 10 times our size, he never lost that enthusiasm for the work. What changed? Kevin laughed, but there was no humor in it. Everything. The market, the clients, the expectations. People want everything faster and cheaper now. They don't care about relationships or quality or doing things the right way. They just want results. Walter was quiet for a moment, still studying the photograph. You know what I see when I look at this picture? What? Two people who believed they could build something that mattered. Walter moved away from the desk and began his cleaning routine, but his movements were even more deliberate than usual, as if he was thinking about something important. Can I ask you something? Kevin said. Sure. What did you do before this, before cleaning offices at midnight? Walter paused in his dusting, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Different things. Different places. It wasn't really an answer, but something in Walter's tone suggested it was all the answer he was going to get. Must be quite a change, though. From whatever you did before, to this. Not as much as you might think, Walter said. People are people, work is work. The only real difference is whether you're building something or just maintaining it. He moved to the windows, spraying cleaner on the glass and beginning to wipe it down in long, even strokes. Your father, Walter continued, he was building something. You can see it in his face, in the way he's standing in that picture. He believed in what he was doing. And me? Walter finished one window and moved to the next. You're trying to maintain something, trying to keep it from falling apart. That's harder work, and it shows. Kevin felt something sharp in his chest. So what's the solution? How do I get back to building instead of just maintaining? Walter stopped cleaning and turned to face him directly. Wrong question. What? The question isn't how you get back to building. The question is what you want to build. Kevin opened his mouth to respond, then closed it. He'd been so focused on saving the company, on maintaining the legacy his father had left him, that he'd never stopped to ask himself what he actually wanted to create. Your father knew what he wanted to build, Walter said, returning to his cleaning. A place where smart people could do their best work, where clients got more than they paid for, where everyone felt like they mattered. That's not sustainable in today's market. Says who? Says everyone. Says the consultants I've hired, says the business books I've read, says the conferences I've attended. You can't compete on quality anymore. You have to compete on efficiency. Walter chuckled, a sound that somehow managed to be both gentle and skeptical. And how's that working out for you? Kevin looked at Janet's resignation letter, still open on his computer screen. Not well. Then maybe everyone's wrong. Kevin arrived at the office the next morning to find his assistant, Linda, packing her desk into a cardboard box. She looked up when he passed, her face flushed with the kind of embarrassment that comes from being caught in an act of betrayal. I was going to tell you properly, she said, not meeting his eyes. First thing this morning. Kevin stopped walking. Tell me what? I'm taking a position with Hensley Associates, starting Monday. Hensley Associates, the firm that had just poached their biggest client and was systematically targeting their best employees. Kevin felt something cold settle in his stomach. Linda, you've been here 6 years. I know. She folded a sweater and placed it carefully in the box. Mr. Smith, I don't want to leave, but they're offering 40% more than I make here, plus better benefits. Plus, she trailed off. Plus what? Plus they actually seem to want me there. The words hit him like a physical blow. Linda had been his father's assistant before she became his. She knew the company better than almost anyone, had been the keeper of relationships and institutional memory that made Smith Industries more than just another consulting firm. What do you mean? They want you there. Linda finally looked at him directly. "When was the last time you asked me what I thought about anything? Not what your schedule looked like or whether I'd booked a conference room, but what I actually thought." Kevin opened his mouth to respond, then realized he couldn't remember. "Your father used to ask my opinion about clients, about proposals, about hiring decisions. He made me feel like I was part of building something. You make me feel like I'm part of maintaining your calendar." After Linda left for her last lunch break, though Kevin didn't know it, Yeth walked through the office with eyes that felt newly opened. The place looked the same as it had for months. People at their desks, phones ringing, the steady hum of productive work. But underneath it all, he sensed something he'd been too busy to notice before. His employees were waiting, not working toward something, not building toward a vision, just waiting. Waiting for 5 o'clock, waiting for the weekend, waiting for something better to come along. At Janet's former desk, he corrected himself. A temporary worker was sorting through files and looking confused. Kevin recognized the woman from the temp agency they'd used before, but couldn't remember her name. "How's it going?" he asked. She looked up, startled. "Oh, Mr. Smith. Fine, I think. Janet left pretty good notes, but some of these client files." She gestured helplessly at a stack of folders. "There's a lot of history here that isn't written down anywhere." Kevin nodded and moved on, but the interaction stuck with him. How much institutional knowledge was walking out the door with every resignation? How many relationships and insights and hard-won understandings were being lost because he'd failed to create a place where people wanted to stay? His phone buzzed. A text from Sarah. "Emma's recital is at 7. Please don't be late. She's been asking all week if Daddy will be there." Kevin typed back, "I'll be there," and tried to mean it. The afternoon brought a parade of small crises. A client complaint about a delayed deliverable. A supplier demanding payment on an overdue invoice. A software license renewal that somehow no one had budgeted for. Each problem was solvable individually, but together they created the kind of grinding stress that made every decision feel like damage control. At 6:30, Kevin was still at his desk, staring at a proposal that needed to be finished before tomorrow's deadline. The numbers weren't working. Even if they won the contract, the margins were so thin they'd barely break even. But they needed the work, needed any work that would keep people employed for another few months. His phone rang. "Emma. Daddy? Mommy says you might be late." Her voice was small, uncertain in the way that children's voices get when they're trying not to show disappointment. "I'm leaving right now, sweetheart. I wouldn't miss your recital." "Promise?" "Promise." Kevin looked at the proposal on his screen, at the emails demanding responses, at the stack of urgent documents that seemed to regenerate every time he thought he'd caught up. Then he looked at the photo of his father, still smiling that impossible smile. He closed his laptop. The elementary school auditorium was exactly as Kevin remembered from his own childhood. Fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, folding chairs arranged in neat rows, that particular smell of industrial carpet and children's anxiety. Sarah waved from the third row, having saved him a seat next to her and his mother. "I was starting to worry," Sarah whispered as he sat down. "I said I'd be here." "You've said that before." Before Kevin could respond, the lights dimmed and Emma appeared on stage with her class, 23 7-year-olds in matching blue shirts, looking simultaneously excited and terrified. Emma found him in the audience immediately, her face lighting up with a smile that made his chest tight. She waved, forgetting for a moment that she was supposed to be standing still and quiet, and Kevin waved back. The performance was Songs of the Seasons, a medley of simple pieces that showcased each grade level. Emma's class sang about autumn leaves and changing colors, their voices high and sweet and slightly off-key in the way that made it perfect. Kevin watched his daughter, really watched her, not the distracted glances he'd been giving her lately, and felt something shift inside him. She was completely present in the moment, completely committed to doing her best, completely unaware that anyone might judge her performance as anything other than wonderful. When had he stopped being like that? When had his work become about avoiding failure instead of creating success? After the recital, they went for ice cream at the place Emma loved, the one with the mismatched furniture and the owner who remembered everyone's favorite flavors. Emma ordered her usual vanilla with rainbow sprinkle sand, chattered about her performance, about her friends, about the solar system project she was working on for science class. Mrs. Patterson says Saturn is her favorite planet because it has rings, Emma said, attacking her ice cream with the focused intensity of childhood. But I like Jupiter because it's the biggest, and it protects all the other planets from asteroids. Jupiter protects the other planets? Kevin asked. Uh-huh. It's so big that it pulls all the dangerous stuff toward itself instead of letting it hit Earth. It's like a bodyguard planet. Sarah smiled at Kevin over Emma's head. She's been reading about astronomy all week. I think we might have a future scientist in the family. Kevin watched his daughter explain the protective qualities of gas giants and felt something crystallize in his mind. Jupiter didn't become the solar system's protector by trying to be smaller or more efficient. It became the protector by being what it was meant to be: massive, stable, present. What if he'd been thinking about everything backwards? They drove home through streets lined with summer evening light, Emma falling asleep in her car seat with ice cream still sticky on her fingers. Sarah was quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet than usual. Less resigned, more thoughtful. "That was nice," she said as they pulled into their driveway. "The recital? All of it. You being there? Really being there, not checking your phone every 5 minutes." Kevin carried Emma inside and tucked her into bed, brushing her hair back from her forehead the way his father used to do for him. She stirred slightly and mumbled something about Jupiter before settling back into sleep. In their bedroom, Sarah was reading, but she looked up when he came in. "Can I ask you something?" Kevin said. "Of course. Do you think I'm like my father?" Sarah closed her book and considered the question seriously. "In some ways. You both care deeply about doing the right thing. You both work too hard. You both have this need to take care of everyone around you. But your father seemed to enjoy it more. The work, the responsibility, the challenge of building something from nothing. You seem to carry it all like a burden." Kevin sat on the edge of the bed. "What if I told you I was thinking about changing everything? About the company, I mean. Not just tweaking things or cutting costs, but actually changing how we do business. I'd say it's about time." Her response surprised him. "You would?" "Kevin, you've been miserable for 2 years. I've watched you try to fix problems by working harder, staying later, taking on more responsibility. But you can't work your way out of a problem that isn't about work. What's it about then?" Sarah reached out and took his hand. "It's about remembering why you wanted to do this in the first place." That night, Kevin couldn't sleep. He found himself thinking about Walter, about their conversation in the conference room, about the way the janitor had looked at his father's photograph. At 2 a.m., he gave up on sleep and drove back to the office. The building was quiet except for the familiar hum of after-hours systems. Kevin took the elevator to the 32nd floor and walked through the darkened corridors toward his office, but stopped when he saw light coming from the conference room. Walter was there, but he wasn't cleaning. He was standing in front of the whiteboard, which was covered with diagrams and notes written in precise handwriting. He looked up when Kevin appeared in the doorway, unsurprised to see him. "Couldn't sleep either?" Walter asked. Kevin stepped into the room and stared at the whiteboard. It was covered with what looked like an organizational chart, but not the traditional hierarchical kind. This one showed connections, relationships between departments, feedback loops between clients and project teams, communication flows that actually reflected how work got done rather than who reported to whom. "What is this?" "Just thinking about what you said last night. About building versus maintaining." Walter capped the marker he'd been using. "Thought I'd sketch out some ideas." "You drew this?" "I've had some experience with organizational design." Kevin studied the diagram more closely. It was sophisticated work, the kind of analysis he would have expected from a high-priced consultant. But more than that, it showed an understanding of Smith Industries that went beyond what someone could learn from cleaning offices. "Walter, who are you?" The older man smiled, the same enigmatic expression Kevin had seen before. "I'm someone who cleans up messes." Some are just bigger than others. He began erasing the whiteboard, but Kevin stopped him. Wait, don't erase that. I want to understand what you're thinking. Walter set down the eraser and pointed to the center of the diagram. Your current structure assumes that information flows up and decisions flow down. But that's not how good work actually happens. He traced a line with his finger. Good work happens when the people closest to the problems have the authority to solve them. When information flows in all directions. When everyone understands not just what they're supposed to do, but why it matters. That sounds idealistic. Does it? Or does it sound like how your father used to run things? Kevin thought about his father's Monday morning meetings, about the way decisions used to be made through conversation rather than hierarchy, about how people used to stay late, not because they had to, but because they wanted to finish something they believed in. The market's different now, Kevin said, but his voice lacked conviction. Markets are just collections of people. People haven't changed. They still want to do meaningful work. They still want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They still respond to leaders who actually care about them. Walter moved to another section of the diagram. Your biggest problem isn't efficiency or cost structure or competitive positioning. Your biggest problem is that your people don't believe in what they're doing anymore. How do I fix that? Wrong question again. Kevin was beginning to recognize this pattern. What's the right question? The right question is, what do you believe in? Kevin looked at the diagram, at the elegant simplicity of Walter's vision for how the company could work. I believe in what my father built, a place where people could do their best work. Then why are you trying to turn it into something else? The question hung in the air between them. Kevin realized he didn't have a good answer. Somewhere along the way, he'd started believing that what his father built wasn't sustainable, wasn't modern enough, wasn't competitive enough. But what if he'd been wrong? What if the problem wasn't that his father's way didn't work anymore, but that Kevin had stopped believing it could work? The Henderson contract, Kevin said suddenly. What about it? They said our work was adequate but uninspired. But that's not what they used to say about us. We used to be the firm that surprised clients, that gave them solutions they didn't know they needed. Walter nodded. So what changed? Kevin thought about the last project he'd personally worked on, really worked on rather than just managing from a distance. It had been months ago, maybe longer. Somewhere along the way, he'd started seeing his role as supervision rather than contribution. I stopped being part of the work, he said slowly. I started managing it instead of doing it. And if I'm not doing the work, if I'm just managing other people doing work I don't understand anymore, then how can I know if it's any good? Walter began cleaning his marker stains from the whiteboard, but left the diagram intact. Your father didn't manage the work, he led it. There's a difference. What's the difference? Management is about maintaining systems. Leadership is about inspiring people to become better than they thought they could be. Kevin stared at the organizational chart, seeing not just a diagram, but a roadmap back to something he'd lost without realizing it. Walter, I need to ask you something, and I need you to give me a straight answer this time. Okay. What did you do before this job? Walter was quiet for a long moment, studying Kevin's face as if deciding whether to trust him. Finally he spoke. I ran a company, not as big as yours, but big enough. Had about 300 employees, did consulting work for manufacturing firms, built it from nothing over 25 years. What happened to it? Same thing that's happening to yours. I forgot what made it special. Started chasing market share instead of excellence. Started managing instead of leading. Started maintaining instead of building. Walter's voice was matter of fact, but Kevin could hear the weight of experience behind it. By the time I realized what I'd lost, it was too late. Sold the company to a private equity firm. They kept the name and the client list, but they fired most of the people and outsourced the rest. Everything I'd built was gone within 6 months. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be smart. Learn from my mistakes instead of making your own. Kevin looked at the diagram again, seeing it now as more than just organizational theory. This was Walter's attempt to save someone else from the mistakes that had cost him everything. Why are you here? Why are you cleaning offices when you could be consulting, teaching, doing something that uses your experience?" Walter smiled sadly. "Because after you lose something like that, you need to remember what real work feels like. You need to start from the bottom and work your way back up to understanding what actually matters." He finished cleaning and packed his supplies back onto the cart. "Besides," Walter added, "sometimes the best way to help someone is to show up where they don't expect you and pay attention to things they've stopped noticing." After Walter left, Kevin sat alone in the conference room, staring at the diagram that represented everything he'd been afraid to try. His phone buzzed with emails, client complaints, vendor invoices, urgent requests that would still be urgent tomorrow and the day after that. For the first time in months, he ignored them. Instead, he pulled out a legal pad and began writing. Not a strategic plan or a cost reduction proposal, but a letter. A letter to his employees, explaining what he'd learned about the difference between building and maintaining, about the difference between managing and leading, about what Smith Industries could become if they were brave enough to remember what it used to be. He wrote until dawn, until the early shift began arriving and the building filled with the sounds of another day. He wrote until he had something that felt true, something his father might have been proud of, something worth building toward. Kevin called an all-hands meeting for Friday at 10 a.m. Not a quarterly review or a budget presentation, but the kind of company-wide gathering his father used to hold when he had something important to say. The kind where everyone sat in folding chairs in the main conference room and actually listened. Word had spread about Janet's resignation, about Linda leaving, about the Henderson contract. People filed into the room with the careful expressions of employees expecting bad news. Kevin saw it in their faces, resignation of workers who'd been through enough layoffs to recognize the signs. He stood at the front of the room without slides or notes, just the letter he'd written in the pre-dawn hours, now folded in his jacket pocket. "I know what you're thinking," he began. "You're waiting for me to tell you about restructuring, about right-sizing, about difficult decisions that need to be made in challenging market conditions." A few nervous laughs. Someone in the back row whispered something to the person next to them. "I'm not here to talk about any of that," Kevin continued. "I'm here to talk about what we've forgotten and what we're going to remember." He pulled out the letter, unfolded it, then set it aside. Whatever he needed to say wouldn't come from the careful words he'd written alone at 3 a.m. "My father started this company because he believed smart people could do great work if you gave them the right environment. He believed clients deserved more than they paid for. He believed everyone in this room mattered." Kevin looked around the room, making eye contact with faces he realized he hadn't really seen in months. There was Miguel from IT, who'd missed his own birthday party to fix the server crash last month. There was Patricia from accounting, who stayed late every quarter end to make sure every number was perfect. There was James from business development, who knew every client's kids' names and remembered to ask about their surgeries and graduations. Somewhere along the way, I stopped believing those things. I started believing that we had to be cheaper, faster, more efficient. I started believing that caring about people was a luxury we couldn't afford. He paused, feeling the weight of their attention. I was wrong. The room was completely quiet now. Even the whispers had stopped. Janet Morrison resigned this week. So did Linda Patterson. They didn't leave because we weren't paying them enough, or because they found better opportunities somewhere else. They left because I stopped making them feel like they mattered. Kevin saw Janet in the fourth row, her resignation letter having been quietly withdrawn after a conversation he'd had with her the night before. She nodded slightly, encouragingly. "I've spent 2 years trying to fix this company by changing everything except the one thing that actually needed changing: me. I stopped leading and started managing. I stopped building and started maintaining. I stopped trusting you to do great work and started treating you like problems to be solved." He moved closer to the group, abandoning the formal distance between speaker and audience. "That ends today. Not because I figured out some new strategy or hired expensive consultants to tell us what we already know. It ends because I've remembered something my father knew. Great companies aren't built by people who are afraid of failing. They're built by people who are excited about succeeding. Kevin pulled out his phone and opened the company's current mission statement and a paragraph of corporate speak that had been focus grouped and lawyer reviewed until it said nothing meaningful to anyone. Our current mission statement talks about leveraging synergies and maximizing stakeholder value. It's garbage, and we all know it. He put the phone away. Here's our real mission. We help our clients solve problems they couldn't solve without us. We do work that makes us proud. We treat each other like people who matter. He looked around the room again, seeing something different in their faces now. Not resignation, but attention. Not fear, but curiosity. I don't have a detailed plan for how we're going to do this. I don't have charts and projections and implementation timelines. What I have is a commitment to stop managing you and start trusting you. To stop worrying about what our competitors are doing and start focusing on what we do best. Kevin moved to the whiteboard and wrote 3 words: build, trust, care. These are our new strategic priorities. We're going to build solutions that surprise our clients. We're going to trust each other to do great work without micromanaging. We're going to care about the outcome, not just the process. He set down the marker and faced the room directly. I know this sounds idealistic. I know some of you are thinking this is just another management speech that won't change anything. You have every right to think that, because I've given you plenty of reasons to be skeptical. Kevin's voice grew quieter, more personal. But I'm asking you to give me one more chance. Give us one more chance. Not because I deserve it, but because what we could build together is worth the risk. He was quiet for a moment, letting that settle. I'm going to start by making some changes. First, we're going back to my father's Monday morning meetings. Not status updates or progress reports, but conversations about the work we're doing and why it matters. Everyone's invited. Everyone's voice counts. A few people exchanged glances, but Kevin saw interest, not skepticism. Second, we're changing how we measure success. I don't care about billable hours or utilization rates. I care about client satisfaction and employee engagement and work that makes us proud when we show it to our families. He moved closer to the group again. Third, we're going to stop competing on price and start competing on value. That means some clients won't be able to afford us anymore. That's okay. The clients who understand what we're offering will pay for it, and they'll be the ones we want to work with anyway. Kevin saw Patricia raise her hand. What about the budget? The quarterly numbers? We can't just ignore the financial reality. You're absolutely right, Kevin said. We can't ignore the financial reality, but the financial reality is that we're slowly dying by trying to be something we're not. The path we're on leads to layoffs and closures and the end of everything my father built. He gestured toward the windows, toward the city beyond. The path I'm proposing is riskier in the short term, but it's the only one that leads to a company worth saving. Miguel from IT raised his hand. What if it doesn't work? What if clients don't want to pay for quality anymore? Then we'll have failed trying to be excellent instead of failing trying to be mediocre, Kevin said. And at least we'll have failed as ourselves. The meeting lasted another hour, with questions and pushback and the kind of honest conversation Kevin realized they hadn't had in years. Not everyone was convinced, but everyone was engaged. People who'd been silent for months spoke up with ideas and concerns and suggestions. When it was over, Kevin felt something he hadn't experienced in a long time: hope mixed with uncertainty, the particular combination that comes with choosing a difficult path because it's the right one. That afternoon, he walked through the office with new eyes. Instead of seeing inefficiencies to be corrected or problems to be managed, he saw people doing work they cared about. Patricia was on the phone with a client, patiently explaining a complex financial projection. Miguel was helping someone from marketing understand why their new software wasn't working the way they expected. James was writing a proposal but stopped to show Kevin photos from his daughter's wedding. At 6 p.m., Kevin packed up his laptop and headed for the elevator. For the first time in months, he was leaving at a reasonable hour, trusting his team to handle whatever needed handling. The elevator stopped at the 32nd floor, and Walter got on with his cleaning cart. He nodded at Kevin, unsurprised to see him leaving early. "Good meeting today," Walter said, as the elevator descended. "You heard about it?" Word travels fast in a building like this. People are talking. That's a good sign. Kevin studied Walter's reflection in the elevator's polished metal doors. "I keep wondering why you helped me, why you cared enough to draw diagrams on whiteboards and tell me things I needed to hear." Walter was quiet for a few floors. Then, "I told you I ran a company once. What I didn't tell you was that I had someone try to help me the way I helped you. An older guy, worked in our mailroom. Used to make observations about the business that were smarter than anything my executives were saying. What happened? I didn't listen, thought I knew better. Thought his perspective didn't matter because his job title wasn't impressive enough." The elevator reached the ground floor, but neither of them moved to get out. 6 months later, my company was dead. Not because the market changed or because we couldn't compete, but because I'd stopped paying attention to the things that actually mattered. Walter pushed the button to close the doors. I swore that if I ever got another chance to help someone avoid that mistake, I'd take it, even if they didn't know they needed help, even if I had to clean their offices to get close enough to see what was really going on. Kevin felt something shift in his understanding. "You didn't just happen to take this job. Professional Building Services has contracts with lots of companies. I asked specifically to be assigned here." "Why here?" "Because your father's reputation still means something. Because people in this industry still talk about Smith Industries like it was special. Because I could see from the outside that you were making the same mistakes I made." The elevator opened at the ground floor again. This time Walter pushed his cart out, but Kevin stayed. "Walter." The older man turned back. "Thank you." Walter smiled, the first completely unguarded expression Kevin had seen from him. "Thank me when you've built something worth thanking me for." At home, Kevin found Sarah and Emma in the kitsmith, making dinner together. Emma was standing on a step stool, carefully stirring something on the stove while Sarah guided her hands. "Daddy," Emma called out when she saw him, "you're home early." "I am. What are you making?" "Spaghetti. Mommy's teaching me how to make the sauce not too thick and not too thin." Sarah looked at Kevin over Emma's head, eyebrows raised in a question. He'd been coming home late so consistently that his early arrival was noteworthy. "Good meeting today?" she asked. "Different meeting. I think better, but we'll see." During dinner, Emma told them about her day at summer camp, about the fort she'd built with her friends, about the counselor who taught them to identify different types of clouds. She spoke with the kind of enthusiasm that made Kevin remember what it felt like to be excited about learning something new. "What kind of clouds did you see today?" he asked. "Cumulus. They're the fluffy ones that look like cotton balls. Mrs. Johnson says they mean good weather." "What about the other kinds?" Emma launched into an explanation of stratus and cirrus clouds, complete with hand gestures and sound effects. Sarah caught Kevin's eye and smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her in weeks. After Emma went to bed, Kevin and Sarah sat on their back porch, watching the summer evening settle over their neighborhood. The air was warm and still, filled with the sounds of children playing and neighbors talking over fences. "Want to tell me about this different meeting?" Sarah asked. Kevin told her about the morning, about the conversation with his employees, about the decision to stop trying to be something they weren't. Sarah listened without interrupting, the way she used to when they were first married, and he would come home full of stories about work. "It sounds scary," she said when he finished. "It is scary. We could fail spectacularly. But you seem lighter somehow. Less like you're carrying the world on your shoulders." Kevin thought about that. "I think I've been carrying the wrong things. Trying to control outcomes instead of focusing on doing good work. Trying to manage everything instead of trusting people to do their jobs. Like Walter said, managing versus leading." "You remember that?" "I remember everything you tell me about Walter. He sounds like someone your father would have liked." Kevin looked up at the sky where Emma's cumulus clouds were slowly giving way to stars. "I think he would have. I think Dad would have listened to Walter in a way I almost didn't." "What changed your mind?" "Emma's recital, actually. Watching her perform without worrying about whether she was good enough, just focused on doing her best. I realized I'd stopped doing that. Stopped caring about whether the work itself was good, and started only caring about whether it was successful. Sarah reached over and took his hand. So what happens now? Now we find out if people still want companies that care more about excellence than efficiency. We find out if there's still room in the world for what Dad built. And if there isn't? Kevin squeezed her hand. Then at least Emma will have seen her father try to build something worth building, instead of just trying to maintain something that was slowly dying. That night, Kevin slept better than he had in months. Not because his problems were solved, if anything, he'd made them more complicated by choosing the harder path. But for the first time in a long time, he was excited about going to work in the morning. The Monday morning meeting felt different from the moment people started filing into the conference room. Instead of the usual scattered arrival people checking phones, grabbing coffee, settling into seats with the resigned energy of another mandatory gathering, there was something expectant in the air. Kevin had moved the table aside and arranged chairs in a circle, the way his father used to do. No hierarchy, no head of the table, just people facing each other as equals. I know this feels strange. Kevin began once everyone had settled. We've been doing status meetings for so long that we've forgotten what it feels like to actually talk about the work. He looked around the circle, seeing faces he was finally learning to read again. Patricia, from accounting, usually silent in meetings, had brought a notebook and was sitting forward in her chair. Miguel had closed his laptop, a small gesture that somehow felt significant. So let's start with something simple. What are you working on that you're excited about? The silence stretched for maybe 30 seconds, long enough for Kevin to wonder if he'd miscalculated, if his team was too beaten down by years of managing and measuring to remember what excitement felt like. Then James, from business development, spoke up. I've been working with that small manufacturing company in Portland, Northwest Precision. They came to us with what they thought was a supply chain problem, but the more I dig into it, the more I think it's actually an opportunity. He leaned forward, his voice gaining energy. Their real problem isn't efficiency, it's that they're so good at what they do, they could be serving a completely different market. Medical devices instead of automotive parts. The precision requirements are actually higher, but so are the margins. Patricia looked up from her notebook. Medical device manufacturing has completely different regulatory requirements. That's not a supply chain consultation, that's business transformation. Exactly, James said, which is why it's interesting. Anyone can optimize their current operations, but helping them see what they could become, that's the kind of work we used to do. Kevin felt something spark in his chest. What would that look like? The engagement, I mean. Bigger than what they asked for. Longer timeline. Probably 3 times what they were expecting to pay, James admitted. But if we're right about the medical device market, we could help them triple their revenue within 18 months. Miguel raised his hand hesitantly. Can I say something? Of course. I've been listening to their calls. Not officially, I was just troubleshooting their VPN connection, but I heard the CEO talking to his operations manager about this exact thing. About wanting to move up market but not knowing how to make the transition. Kevin saw the spark jump to other faces around the circle. So they're already thinking about it, Patricia said. They just don't know how to get there. Which means, James continued, if we propose the right solution, we wouldn't be selling them something they don't want. We'd be offering them something they're already hoping for. This was how it used to work, Kevin realized. Not someone presenting a finished analysis to be approved or rejected, but people building on each other's insights, seeing patterns and possibilities that none of them could have seen alone. What do you need to make this happen? Kevin asked. James looked surprised by the question. What do I need? To put together a real proposal. Not the safe version that gives them exactly what they ask for, but the version that gives them what they actually need. Time to research the medical device market. Maybe a week to really understand the regulatory landscape. And probably a conversation with someone who's done this kind of transition before. Kevin nodded. Take the time, find the expert. Do it right. Even if it means we might lose the original contract? Especially if it means we might lose the original contract. If we're not willing to risk the small opportunity to pursue the big one, we're not really offering them our best thinking. The meeting continued for another hour, with people sharing projects and challenges and ideas in a way that felt more like conversation than presentation. Kevin realized he was learning things about his own company, that he'd never known relationships with clients that went deeper than the formal contracts, insights about markets and opportunities that had never made it into official reports, creative solutions that had been abandoned because they didn't fit the template of what clients expected. When it was over, people didn't immediately rush back to their desks. They lingered, continuing conversations, making connections, volunteering to help with projects that weren't technically their responsibility. Kevin stayed in the conference room after everyone left, looking at the whiteboard where people had sketched ideas and drawn connections between different projects. It looked chaotic compared to the neat bullet points and action items of their old meetings, but it also looked alive. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Good meeting, keep going." Kevin smiled and typed back, "How did you know about the meeting?" The response came quickly. "Patricia's excited. She called her husband to tell him about work for the first time in 2 years." Word travels. That afternoon, Kevin got a call from Jim Patterson, their longest-standing client. "Kevin, I heard an interesting rumor." "What kind of rumor?" "That you're making some changes, getting back to the way your father used to run things." Kevin felt his stomach tighten. In the current market, any change could be perceived as instability. "Where did you hear that?" "From James. He called me this morning about an idea for expanding our West Coast operations. Completely outside the scope of our current contract, but exactly the kind of thinking we used to get from Smith Industries." Kevin waited, unsure whether this was good news or bad news. "I want to schedule a meeting," Jim continued. "Not about our current projects, about what else you might be able to help us with. We've been looking for a partner who could think strategically about our growth plans, not just execute tactical projects. Jim, I should probably mention that we're evolving. Our approach, our pricing structure, the way we work with clients. It might not be what you're used to." "Good," Jim said firmly. "What we're used to isn't working anymore. We need a consulting firm that cares more about our success than about their billable hours." After the call, Kevin walked through the office with a feeling he was still learning to recognize. Not the grim satisfaction of problems solved or crises averted, but something warmer and more sustainable. People were working, but they were also talking to each other, sharing ideas, building on each other's thinking. At Patricia's desk, he stopped to look at the financial models she was building for James's manufacturing client. The work was more sophisticated than anything he'd seen from the accounting department in months. "This is impressive," he said. Patricia looked up, surprised. "Oh, thanks. I got interested in the medical device market after this morning's meeting. Did you know the regulatory approval process can actually be a competitive advantage if you know how to navigate it properly?" "I didn't know that. Most companies see FDA approval as a barrier, but if you're one of the few manufacturers who really understands the process, you can help your clients get to market faster. It's not just about compliance, it's about competitive positioning." Kevin studied the models, seeing not just numbers but strategy, not just analysis but insight. "Patricia, when was the last time you worked directly with a client?" "Directly? Years. Maybe not since your father was running things. Now I just prepare reports for the project managers to present. What if that changed? What if you were part of the client conversations, especially for projects that involve financial modeling?" Her face lit up with an expression Kevin hadn't seen in the accounting department for a long time. "You mean actually use what I know instead of just preparing summaries for other people to use?" "I mean treat you like the expert you are instead of like a support function." That evening, Kevin found himself staying late again, but for different reasons. Instead of trying to catch up on emails and administrative tasks, he was really reading the work his team was producing. Not just scanning for errors or checking that deliverables met their contractual requirements, but trying to understand what his people were learning, what insights they were developing, what possibilities they were seeing. He was deep into Patricia's analysis of regulatory frameworks when he heard the familiar squeak of Walter's cleaning cart in the hallway. "Working late again?" Walter asked from the doorway. "Different kind of late," Kevin said. "Learning instead of managing." Walter entered the office and began his cleaning routine, but his movements were more relaxed than usual, less focused on the work and more open to conversation. "How was the meeting this morning?" "Good. Really good. People are starting to remember what it feels like to be excited about work." "And you? Are you remembering?" Kevin considered the question. "I think so. It's strange I feel busier than before, but less overwhelmed. Like I'm working on the right things instead of just working on everything." Walter nodded, dusting the bookshelf with the same methodical care he brought to everything. "That's the difference between urgent and important. Most executives spend their time on things that feel urgent but don't actually matter." "What matters?" "Same thing that's always mattered. Are you helping people do work they're proud of? Are you solving problems that are worth solving? Are you building something that will still matter in 10 years? Kevin looked at the reports spread across his desk, not the usual stack of administrative documents and financial summaries, but actual analysis, real insights, the kind of work that could change how clients thought about their businesses. "I think we might be," he said. "But it's early. We could still fail. You could fail trying to be excellent, or you could fail trying to be mediocre," Walter said, echoing Kevin's words from the company meeting. "I know which one I'd rather risk." Walter finished cleaning and moved toward the door, then paused. "Kevin, can I tell you something?" "Of course. I've been cleaning offices for 8 months now. Seen a lot of companies, a lot of executives, a lot of teams. Most of them are just going through the motions, people doing jobs instead of work, managers managing instead of leading." He looked directly at Kevin. "This week was the first time I've heard people in a building excited about what they were doing. Not just glad to have jobs, but actually excited about the work itself. That's rare." After Walter left, Kevin called Sarah. "How was your day?" she asked. "Different. Better, I think. People are starting to care again." "Including you?" Kevin looked around his office, at the reports and analyses and strategies that represented not just business, but the possibility of building something meaningful. "Especially me." "Good. Emma wants to know if you'll be home for dinner tomorrow. She's making dessert." "What kind of dessert?" "She won't tell me. Says it's a surprise for Daddy because he's been happier lately." Kevin felt something warm settle in his chest. "Tell her I'll be there. And Sarah?" "Yeah?" "Thank you for being patient while I figured this out." "You're not done figuring it out yet." "No, but I'm figuring out the right things now instead of the wrong things." The next morning brought an email from James that made Kevin smile before he'd even finished his first cup of coffee. "Kevin, Northwest Precision wants to meet about the medical device transition. They said, and I quote, 'This is the first time a consulting firm has understood our business better than we do. Meeting scheduled for Friday. I think we might be onto something.'" Kevin forwarded the email to Patricia and Miguel, then walked through the office to find them. Not to manage their response or approve their approach, but to share in the excitement of work that mattered. He found them in the conference room, already deep in conversation about regulatory timelines and market analysis. They looked up when he entered, and he saw something in their faces that had been missing for too long. They looked like people who believed in what they were doing. 3 months later, Kevin stood in the same conference room where Walter had drawn his organizational diagram, but everything felt different. The whiteboard was covered with project timelines and client feedback, but more than that, it was covered with evidence that people cared about their work again. Northwest Precision had signed a 6-month engagement worth more than the original contract they'd lost with Henderson. Better yet, they'd referred 2 other manufacturing companies who were interested in similar transformations. Patricia had become the lead consultant on regulatory strategy, working directly with clients instead of preparing reports for other people to present. Miguel had developed a technology assessment framework that was attracting attention from companies they'd never even pitched. But it wasn't the financial success that made Kevin feel different as he prepared for this morning's meeting. It was the sound of the office people talking to each other about ideas, not just tasks. the energy of collaboration instead of compliance. The Monday morning circle had evolved into something none of them had planned. People brought challenges they couldn't solve alone, insights from clients that might apply to other projects, ideas that didn't fit into any existing category but felt important anyway. It had become less like a meeting and more like a conversation that happened to take place at work. This morning, Kevin had something to share that he'd been thinking about for weeks. "I want to talk about something that might sound crazy," he began once everyone had settled into the circle. "Good crazy or bad crazy?" James asked, but he was smiling. "I'm not sure yet. Walter Knight, Janitor. He's been here for about 5 months now. Some of you have probably seen him around." A few nods. Patricia raised her hand. "He helped me figure out why the printer in the accounting department kept jamming. Turns out he used to work with industrial equipment." "Yeah, about that," Kevin said. "Walter didn't just work with industrial equipment. He used to run a consulting company, about the same size as ours." The circle went quiet. Miguel looked confused. "Wait, what?" Kevin took a breath. "He lost his company making the same mistakes I was making. Started managing instead of leading, competing on price instead of value. He took this job because he wanted to understand what real work felt like again." "And?" Patricia asked. "And he's been helping me remember what our company used to be, what it could be again. The organizational changes we've made, the focus on building instead of maintaining, a lot of that came from conversations with Walter." James leaned back in his chair. "So our janitor is actually a management consultant. Our janitor is actually someone who understands what we're trying to build because he's been where we're headed if we do it wrong." Kevin looked around the circle, seeing the mixture of surprise and curiosity he'd expected. "Here's the crazy part. I want to offer him a job, not as a janitor, but as a senior advisor. Someone who can help us avoid the mistakes he made, help our clients navigate transformations like the ones we're doing with Northwest Precision." The silence stretched longer this time. Finally, Patricia spoke up. "What does he think about this idea?" "I haven't asked him yet. I wanted to talk to you first. This affects everyone, how we work, who we work with, what we offer clients. I'm not going to make this decision alone." Miguel raised his hand tentatively. "Can I ask something that might sound stupid?" "Nothing sounds stupid here," Kevin said. "Why is he cleaning offices if he has all this experience?" "I mean, I get wanting to understand real work, but 5 months seems like a long time for that." Kevin had wondered the same thing. "I think he's been waiting." "For what?" "For us to become the kind of company he'd want to work for again." The conversation continued for another hour, with questions and concerns and ideas that Kevin hadn't considered. Not everyone was convinced it was the right move, but everyone was engaged with the question. They talked about what it would mean to have someone on the team who'd been through the kind of failure they were trying to avoid, what clients might think about hiring a firm that employed their former janitor as a consultant, how they'd structure a role that didn't fit any traditional category. By the end of the meeting, they had something that felt like consensus. Not agreement on every detail, but alignment on the principle. If Walter could help them serve their clients better, they wanted him on the team. That evening, Kevin stayed late again, but this time he was waiting for Walter rather than avoiding going home. When the familiar squeak of the cleaning cart announced Walter's arrival on the executive floor, Kevin was ready. "Walter, could I talk to you for a minute?" Walter parked his cart and entered the office, but instead of beginning his cleaning routine, he sat down in the chair across from Kevin's desk. As if he'd been expecting this conversation. "You want to offer me a job," Walter said. Kevin wasn't entirely surprised that Walter had figured it out. "How did you know?" "Same way I knew you were in trouble 3 months ago. I pay attention to things other people don't notice." "And?" Walter was quiet for a moment, looking around the office that he'd been cleaning every night for 5 months. "What kind of job?" "Senior advisor, someone who helps our clients think through major transitions. Someone who helps us avoid the mistakes you made with your company." "You want to hire your janitor as a consultant. I want to hire someone who understands what excellent looks like because he's seen what happens when you stop pursuing it." Walter stood up and walked to the window. looking out at the city lights that had been the backdrop for so many of their late-night conversations. "Can I ask you something, Kevin?" "Of course. Why now?" "You could have offered me this job 2 months ago when things started turning around. You could have made this offer after the Northwest Precision deal. Why wait until now?" Kevin considered the question. "Because 2 months ago, I was still thinking like someone who needed to be saved. Now I'm thinking like someone who's building something worth joining." Walter turned back from the window. "What's the difference?" "The difference is that 2 months ago, I would have been hiring you to fix our problems. Now I'm asking you to help us solve our clients' problems." Walter smiled, the first completely relaxed smile Kevin had seen from him since their first conversation. "That's the right answer," Walter said. "So you'll do it?" "Under one condition." "What's that?" "I keep working the night shift for another month. Finish what I started with professional building services, train my replacement properly. I don't believe in leaving people in the lurch." Kevin laughed. "Even after everything we've talked about, you're still worried about doing the right thing by the cleaning company?" "Especially after everything we've talked about. How you treat people when you don't need them anymore tells you everything about who you really are." The transition took 6 weeks, instead of Walter's projected month, partly because he insisted on training 2 different replacement janitors until he was satisfied they understood the building's specific requirements. Kevin watched this process with fascination, seeing Walter apply the same attention to detail and care for others that had made him an effective business leader. When Walter finally started his new role in early December, the change was both dramatic and subtle. Dramatic because clients immediately responded to his insights about organizational transformation. Subtle because he approached consulting the same way he'd approached cleaning, methodically, carefully, with respect for the people affected by the work. His first major engagement was with a client Patricia had identified, a regional hospital system that was struggling with operational efficiency. Walter spent the first week of the project not in conference rooms or executive offices, but on the hospital floors, talking to nurses and technicians and administrative staff about what actually made their work difficult. "Most consultants," he told Kevin after that first week, "talk to the people who hired them about the people who actually do the work. I'd rather talk to the people who do the work about the people who hired us." The insights that came from this approach were immediate and actionable. The hospital's efficiency problems weren't caused by lazy employees or outdated systems, but by a communication structure that forced frontline staff to work around policies instead of within them. "It's not that people don't want to do good work," Walter explained to the hospital's board of directors during his presentation. "It's that the current system makes good work harder than it should be." His recommended changes were simpler and more fundamental than the expensive technology upgrades the hospital had been considering. Better information flow, clearer decision-making authority, and trust in the people who were already trying to do excellent work. 6 months after implementation, the hospital's patient satisfaction scores had improved by 30%, staff turnover had dropped to the lowest level in 5 years, and they'd reduced costs without laying off a single employee. Word spread quickly in the healthcare industry, then in manufacturing, then in other sectors where Walter's combination of business acumen and genuine respect for workers created results that purely analytical approaches couldn't match. By the end of Kevin's first year of building instead of maintaining, Smith Industries had doubled their revenue and tripled their client satisfaction scores. More importantly, they had a waiting list of people who wanted to work for them, not because they were desperate for jobs, but because they wanted to be part of what the company was building. The office felt different too, not just busier, but more alive. People stayed late, not because they had to, but because they were excited about finishing projects. They collaborated not because it was required, but because they genuinely enjoyed solving problems together. Kevin found himself thinking often about Jupiter, the planet that protected other planets, not by being smaller or more efficient, but by being what it was meant to be. Smith Industries wasn't trying to be the biggest consulting firm or the fastest or the cheapest. They were trying to be the firm that helped people do their best work, and it turned out there was more demand for that than Kevin had ever imagined. One evening in late spring, almost a year after Walter's first conversation about building versus maintaining, Kevin was walking through the office when he noticed Walter in the conference room, erasing the whiteboard after a client meeting. His movements were as methodical as they'd been when he was cleaning, but now he was erasing strategic plans and implementation timelines instead of leftover notes from budget meetings. Kevin joined him, picking up a second eraser. "Some habits die hard," Walter said, noticing Kevin's help with the cleaning. "Good habits shouldn't die at all." They worked in comfortable silence for a few minutes, cleaning the space for whatever conversation would happen there tomorrow. "Can I ask you something?" Kevin said. "Always. Do you miss it, running your own company?" Walter considered the question while he cleaned the last section of the board. "I miss the feeling of building something from nothing. I miss the pride of creating jobs for people, of solving problems that hadn't been solved before." He paused. "But I don't miss the isolation of being the person who had to have all the answers. And now? Now I get to be part of building something again, but I don't have to carry it alone. That's better than what I had before." Kevin understood. The weight of leadership hadn't disappeared when he stopped trying to manage everything, but it had become shared weight, distributed among people who cared about the outcome. "Walter?" "Yeah? Thank you. Not just for the advice or the insights, but for showing up where I didn't expect you and paying attention to things I'd stopped noticing." Walter smiled and gathered his cleaning supplies, a small bucket and cloth that he still used from habit, even though he hadn't been responsible for actually cleaning the room in months. "That's what good work looks like," he said, "showing up where you're needed and paying attention to what matters." As they left the conference room together, Kevin thought about his father's photograph, still sitting on his desk, but no longer the source of guilt it had once been. He was finally building something his father would have been proud of, not by trying to recreate what had existed before, but by remembering what had made it worth creating in the first place. Outside, the city hummed with the energy of people going home after meaningful work, and Kevin Smith walked toward his car with the satisfaction of a man who had learned the difference between success and excellence, between managing and leading, between maintaining what was dying and building what could live. The next morning would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new clients who needed help remembering what they were capable of becoming. And Kevin would meet those challenges not as someone trying to save a failing company, but as someone building something worth believing in. Walter had been right about everything: the difference between urgent and important, between building and maintaining, between treating people like problems to be managed and like partners in creating something meaningful. Most of all, he'd been right that sometimes the best way to help someone is to show up where they don't expect you and pay attention to the things they've stopped noticing, because that's what good work looks like. Seeing what others have missed, caring about what others have forgotten, and building what others have given up on. That's what makes a company worth saving and a life worth living.